Hey guys, tonight we slide into silken sheets stained with royal sweat and settle beside a dying king who smells like rot and regret. You're standing in a dark, silent room at Whitehall Palace. It's January 1547. The torches hiss low. The tapestries tremble slightly, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. You're not sure what's worse, the smell of the wound on Henry's leg, or the way no one mentions it. Either way, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You tiptoe closer to the massive oak bed carved with lion heads and royal crests. But tonight, there is no roar left. The mattress groans under the monstrous weight of King Henry VIII, once the golden boy of Christendom, now a bloated shadow of majesty. His body sprawls across the sheets, his legs wrapped in stained bandages, oozing something that no one dares name. The room is quiet save for his rattling breath and the occasional hiss of someone discreetly lighting another stick of incense. The tapestries are drawn tight, and the fire struggles to keep up with the damp cold. Henry stirs groans. He's awake but barely. You can't tell if his eyes are open because he's alert or just because his eyelids are too swollen to close. Somewhere near the window, a servant silently pours wine into a pewter goblet. Not that the king will drink it. He hasn't swallowed properly in days. Still, ritual must be upheld. This is the bed of England's most feared ruler. And fear, much like the ulcer on his leg, lingers long after its source dies. His body is a disaster of history. You glance at his enormous stomach, distended, blotchy, and barely covered by the finest linens. It rises and falls, but slowly, like an overfilled wineskin left to ferment. His once mighty legs are now little more than infected stilts, wrapped tightly to hold in the decay. Historians still argue whether Henry's leg ulcer was the result of an old jousting injury or some combination of diabetes and poor hygiene. But no one disputes its stench. It had its own orbit. Court physicians tried everything: ointments, oils, hot irons, even crushed pearls, and none of it worked. At this point, they were basically just seasoning the corpse. You step closer. The floor creaks. Henry's eyelids flutter. He mumbles something. It might be Latin or gibberish. His tongue lolls thick and cracked. His once fierce voice, a tool that ordered executions and marriages with equal weight, is now reduced to shallow rasping. And yet, no one dares declare him dying. Not yet. Because when kings die, so do careers. You can almost hear the thoughts rattling in the heads of his courtiers. Don't say he's dying until you know who's in charge next. Beside the bed sits a priest, not reading, just watching. Ready, but not invited. Nearby, an apothecary shuffles his vials like a gambler hoping for a miracle. One servant holds a silver tray of candied figs. For appearances, the king hasn't had a sweet tooth since his last molar fell out. In a corner wrapped in his own silence is Sir Anthony Denny, the only man in the room who knows the end is near. Henry has begun refusing food, his speech slurring into oblivion. Denny knows the code: the king's death cannot be announced until all political arrangements are in place. It's less about mourning than maneuvering. The bed creaks again. A breeze sneaks through the shutters and touches your neck. Cold, not the weather. The kind of chill that belongs to death. Henry opens his eyes, or at least the one that still works, and stares at the ceiling. In his prime, he would have shouted for a ceiling to be repainted if it dared to bore him. Now he doesn't even blink. Maybe he sees angels. Maybe he sees ghosts. Maybe he sees nothing at all. It's easy to forget this man was once a Renaissance prince, fluent in Latin, a composer of madrigals, a champion archer. And now he barely qualifies as alive. You watch as a servant dares to dab sweat from his brow. The cloth comes away yellow. Henry grunts, but doesn't resist. That alone tells you everything. The lion no longer growls. There's a moment, just one, where you catch a flicker of something human. His fingers twitch, not in pain, maybe memory. He mouths something. The priest leans in. "Jane," the king whispers. Barely. Jane Seymour. The one wife who died before he could turn on her. The mother of his only son. The only woman buried beside him by his own request. Strange, isn't it? All the queens who lived discarded. The one who died idealized. And then silence again. No priest dares continue the rites without official permission. No advisor speaks. The king breathes. Barely. And the room holds its breath too. Outside, the Thames flows thick and gray. Life continues beyond these walls. But inside, power rots slowly. Like the man himself. You don't move. No one does. Because when a king like Henry VIII is dying, the real danger isn't that he might pass, it's that he might not. The line between breath and death is so thin now, so precarious, that even a whisper could tip the balance. And if he lives a few more hours, a few more days, that's time enough for heads to roll. Again. You glance around the chamber, careful not to make a sound. Everyone is here for a reason, but no one for the same one. The nobleman near the fireplace, warming his hands, he's hoping to be named to the Regency Council. The woman arranging the king's pillows with too much care. Her brother has debts, and this is her gamble. And you're just trying to survive the smell. It's no ordinary odor. It's history decomposing in real time. The physician closest to the king finally moves. He lifts the sheet just slightly and peeks beneath. You catch the flicker of green. Not mold, but not mold. The ulcer on Henry's leg has eaten through skin fat and reputation. In truth, he hasn't walked properly in years. A hoist was installed in the palace to help him up and down stairs. Not that he used it often, he mostly held court in bed like some monstrous, irritable god. Historians still argue whether Henry's later paranoia came from syphilis, head trauma from jousting, or simple overindulgence in wine, meat, and ego. What's clear is this: by the end, he trusted no one. Not his advisors, not his wives. Certainly not his own body. You hear a noise, soft, rhythmic, almost like sobbing. But when you turn, it's just the dog. Yes, the dog. Henry's spaniel curled at the foot of the bed, eyes glazed over, but still loyal. It hasn't moved in hours. But it's breathing, just like its master. And here's something you didn't expect. There are mirrors in this room, and they're all covered. Black cloths shrouding them like corpses. Not because of superstition, but protocol. In Tudor tradition, mirrors are veiled when death comes near, lest the soul get trapped in the glass. Or perhaps more realistically, so courtiers don't catch a glimpse of their own fear. Henry's hand twitches again, this time more forcefully. His fingers curl, grasping at the air, as if trying to seize something just out of reach. His lips move. You lean in. Cromwell. Oof. That name. It hangs in the room like a blade. Thomas Cromwell, his once favorite minister, executed by Henry's own order. And yet in this final moment, it's not Anne Boleyn, not Catherine of Aragon, not even his beloved Edward he calls out for, but Cromwell. The man who reformed the kingdom, streamlined its bureaucracy, and lost his head over a disastrous fourth marriage. Funny how memory works when your body's failing. A nobleman shifts uncomfortably near the foot of the bed. That's Lord Hertford Edward Seymour, brother to Jane Seymour, uncle to the boy king who's about to inherit a kingdom held together with spit and proclamations. Hertford is calculating now. Every breath the king takes is another moment he has to keep his mouth shut and his ambitions quieter. The king groans louder this time. Everyone freezes. His eyelids crack open, just barely. He mouths something. It sounds like water. A servant bolts forward, goblet in hand, but Denny shakes his head. It's too late for water, too late for comfort. The king's throat is raw, his tongue swollen. Even a sip might drown him. So the cup is held near but not offered. A cruel pantomime of care. In the hallway beyond the chamber, you hear footsteps. Slow, cautious, like the castle itself is holding its breath. A boy walks in Edward, 9 years old, pale and composed beyond his years. He doesn't speak. He doesn't cry. He just looks at the man who ruled through terror charm and willpower alone. And sees a husk. It's hard to know what the boy thinks. Is he afraid, proud, confused? Probably all three. You want to whisper to him, tell him to run, to play, to laugh while he can. But history has already written his fate. King by 10, dead by 15, and Henry. He sees the boy too, or thinks he does. His lips twitch into what might be a smile or a grimace. And then he turns his head, not away but upward. His breath is shallow now. The room grows colder. You can hear your own heartbeat in your ears. One of the physicians clears his throat, almost as if to speak, but no one lets him. This is the dance. You wait. You watch. You pretend not to know. Because acknowledging the king is dying is the most dangerous thing anyone here could do. But you know. You smell it. You feel it in your bones. The king's breath catches just once. Then continues. He's still here. But barely. The body is failing, yes, but the idea of Henry, that towering, terrifying golden-haired colossus who reformed religion, married 6 women, and rewrote England to fit his waistline, he's clinging to something. Maybe legacy, maybe guilt, maybe both. You take a step back. The candlelight flickers. A breeze slips under the door. Something has shifted. You don't know what yet, but something. The king is alive, but only technically. You stay perfectly still, because in this moment, no movement feels safe. The king may not be able to speak, but that doesn't mean he isn't aware. Henry has always been terrifyingly good at seeing through people, especially when they think he's weakest. He lies there enormous, in both body and myth, the very weight of him sinking into the mattress like a fallen monument. His skin glistens, not with sweat exactly, but with the kind of sticky dampness that clings to a man who's been fighting gravity for decades. And his breath, rasping wet and just a little bit wrong, echoes like a broken bell through the chamber. You shift your gaze to the foot of the bed, where the physicians pretend to take notes. Pretend. That's important. Because everyone here knows they aren't really trying to save him anymore. They're documenting, observing, recording history as it collapses into itself. One of them murmurs about imbalance of the humors, which is a fancy way of saying we have no idea what's going on. But it sounds bad. You almost want to laugh. Almost. But instead, you notice something strange. One of the pillows has a slight rust-colored smear. Not fresh, but not old either. That ulcer on Henry's leg, it's not just grotesque. It's lethal. A wide-open wound that never healed, always wept, always stank. By now, it's likely infected deep into the bone. Historians still argue whether it was diabetes, osteomyelitis, or simply years of untreated injuries compounded by obesity. Whatever it was, it turned his body into a war zone and his moods into a battlefield. The man who once danced, jousted, and wrote poetry now can't sit up without assistance. But still he's king, still dangerous, and still unpredictable. The chamber door creaks again, and this time it's someone unexpected, Lady Mary, his daughter. 31, proud, and absolutely done with everyone's nonsense. She walks with slow grace, chin-high expression, unreadable. Mary's had a lifetime of learning to hide emotion. She doesn't speak, just nods to Denny, then stands near the bed watching. Her face doesn't change when she sees him, doesn't flinch, doesn't soften. You can't tell if it's loyalty or armor. Maybe both. Henry doesn't open his eyes, but his hand stirs again as if sensing her presence. He murmurs something you can't quite hear. It sounds like Latin, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. With Henry, they often sounded the same. Mary says nothing, but you notice her lips move slightly, as if mouthing something under her breath. A Hail Mary, a plea, a goodbye. Hard to know. You wonder if she's remembering her mother, Catherine of Aragon, cast aside and exiled, dying far from court, while Henry celebrated another wedding. Mary never forgave him for that. And yet, here she is, at his side, at the end. A servant rushes in with a cloth, quickly dabbing at Henry's chest. His gown, more a robe, really is stained, the fabric clinging damply to his skin. The cloth smells of herbs, but it's no match for the rot. You resist the urge to step back. There's a sudden clang from outside the chamber, not loud, but enough to send a ripple through the room. Everyone tenses. One of the guards mutters that it's just the kitchens. But you catch Hartford exchanging a glance with another noble one of those looks that carries meaning like a dagger carries weight. They're getting ready. Power is already shifting even before the king's final breath. You can't blame them. Henry's death isn't just a personal tragedy, it's a logistical nightmare. He has one male heir, Edward, barely 10 years old and fragile as parchment. There's no clear line of regency, and every noble here is jostling for influence. The wrong move now could mean exile, or worse. Henry shifts again, groaning low and long, as if the sound comes not from his mouth, but from the very foundations of the palace. His hand curls, grasping nothing, or perhaps grasping something invisible like memories or regrets or ghosts. You remember something strange then, a detail from a gossiping clerk. Earlier in the day, Henry reportedly ordered a new will to be drafted. Not read aloud, not discussed, just ordered whispered behind heavy doors. Historians still argue whether that final will was ever fully honored or if some ambitious hands edited it after the fact. Either way, the tension in the room thickens. Everyone knows that when the king dies, the truth becomes what survives. The dog stirs again. You glance at it, still breathing, still loyal, even as the man beside it slips further from consciousness. Funny, isn't it? In the end, the only creature not scheming in this room is the one with fur. Outside the window, the sky is turning. Gray and sluggish like old milk, dawn is coming. And with it the possibility of death. For some reason, kings always seem to die at dawn. Maybe it's symbolic, or maybe that's just when everyone's too exhausted to pretend anymore. Henry gasps, not like before, sharper, real. Everyone freezes, his eyes open, wide, bloodshot, panicked. He tries to sit up, fails. Then his lips part, and for a second you think he might speak. One final proclamation. One last word to echo through the centuries. But no, just breath. Ragged, short, fading. His eyes lock with Mary's. She doesn't flinch. And then slowly, his eyes unfocus. Not closed, just gone. But he's still breathing. Still here. For now. You count the seconds between each breath. 6, 7, 8. Then a weak inhale. Then again longer this time. 10, 11, 12. The room holds its collective breath with him, as if by doing so they can slow his passing or speed it along. Nobody knows which would be kinder. Mary doesn't move. Her eyes stay fixed on her father's. But you notice her hands, tight fists, knuckles pale against her dark gown. Maybe she's remembering the tower, or the exile, or the time he refused to see her for months until she renounced her mother. It was always conditional, this love. You glance around and realize something quietly astonishing. This is the most powerful man in Europe, and he's dying in near silence. No royal choirs, no epic proclamations, just damp linens, twitching fingers, and a fading stench that not even the crushed rosemary tucked under the mattress can mask anymore. And that brings you back to the smell. It's everywhere now. The ulcer on his leg, once manageable, has turned catastrophic. Not just infected, but necrotic. His body, despite all the leeches, poultices, and prayers, is rotting before it's dead. Some whisper it's divine punishment. Others just science catching up with excess. Historians still argue whether it was syphilis Cushing's disease or untreated diabetes that triggered his final decline. But the outcome is the same: bloated, bedridden, and barely human. The king is dying molecule by molecule. You step back almost instinctively, as if death might be contagious. Then suddenly he speaks. Just one word, barely audible. Elizabeth. The sound cuts the air like a crack in glass. Heads turn, Mary's lips part, but she says nothing. Her half-sister's name hanging in the air is like an accusation. Or a benediction. No one knows. And Elizabeth is far away, too far to be summoned now. But she'll feel it surely. That strange, cold ripple when your destiny shifts without your consent. She always did have that eerie perception. You make a mental note: if he dies today, she'll be the most dangerous woman in England within the decade. Hartford clears his throat. Softly, cautiously. We should prepare, he says to no one and everyone. The physicians nod as though confirming something profound, but they're already irrelevant. Henry isn't a patient anymore. He's a symbol in his final moment of meaning. There's movement at the far end of the room. An archbishop summoned an hour ago finally arrives with his assistants. They come with a small velvet box and solemn expressions. Last rites. You watch as they approach, murmuring Latin one eye on the king, the other on the courtiers. It's as much a performance as a ritual. Everyone wants to be seen doing the correct thing. Henry's eyes are open again, just barely, and he's following the motion of the crucifix. His lips tremble. You lean forward, trying to catch another word, but there's only a long exhale. Not the last, but close. The archbishop lifts a silver spoon, dripping with sacred oil, and touches it gently to Henry's brow. You can't help but think how strange it is to anoint someone already decomposing. Then someone sneezes. A small, absurd thing. But it slices through the room like a guillotine. You catch yourself suppressing a snort. This is how kings die, with tears, prayers, and unfortunately timed bodily functions. Still, the moment resets the tension. People glance at each other, unsure whether to laugh or shush. Mary, unbothered, takes a single step closer. And that's when it happens. A gurgle, not quite a groan, not quite a cough. The dog bolts from the bed. The air changes sharp and still. Then, silence. Not the gentle kind, the heavy, dead kind. Everyone waits. 5 seconds. 10. No breath, no twitch. The physician closest to him leans forward, placing 2 fingers on the thick folds of Henry's neck. Waits, then nods. Just once. It's done. Henry VIII, King of England, France, and Ireland, Lord of Ireland, defender of the faith, head of the Church of England, scourge of popes, slayer of wives, has finally irrevocably stopped. A murmur runs through the room like a ghost just passed through everyone at once. He's dead. And in the strangest way, the air lightens. Not happier, but released. Mary turns and leaves. No fanfare. No tears. Behind her, Hertford is already speaking in a hushed voice to his allies. The word council is muttered. Succession, Edmund Seymour. And then, as if remembering their roles, the servants begin to move. Curtains are drawn, candles trimmed, linen fetched. You look down at the king's face. He doesn't look peaceful, but he does look empty. The swelling, the sores, the stink, they remain. But whatever part of him was power fury and fear that's gone, evaporated. You step back and realize something simple but immense. There is no such thing as a dignified death for a tyrant, only a necessary one. Outside the windows, the sky is turning gold. Birds are beginning to stir in the garden. You almost want to laugh at the absurdity nature still beautiful, still reliable, while empires crumble in bed sheets. You hear a servant whispering, "Long live the king," meaning Edward now. The sickly, solemn boy with ink-stained fingers and a habit of quoting the Psalms too loudly. You wonder if he'll last. Spoiler, not really. But that's a tale for another evening. For now you look one last time at the mountain of a man who changed everything, split a church, broke 6 marriages, and made everyone afraid to blink near him. Henry VIII, the rotting tyrant king. And now, history. You remain frozen in place for a moment, unsure what's expected of you now. He's gone. For real this time. No miraculous recoveries. No thunderous roars from the sickbed. Just the hush of finality. And yet his presence still lingers. Not in a spiritual way, nothing so comforting. More like a storm that's passed, but left everything soaked and smoldering. His absence is loud. Already there's movement. You hear the rustle of robes and hushed voices in corners. Everyone's suddenly much more aware of their posture, their alliances, and the paper trails they've left behind. When a king dies, you don't just mourn. You reposition. Remember, this isn't just any death. It's his. The man who once had Thomas More executed for not acknowledging Anne Boleyn, who turned Catholicism upside down because the Pope wouldn't let him have a different bed partner, who sent 2 queens to the block and pretended to be heartbroken both times. So no, this isn't a funeral. It's a chessboard, and the pieces are already in motion. You drift to the edge of the room watching as Edward Seymour, now effectively England's next power player, begins whispering with fellow council members. His face is calm, but there's a faint sheen of sweat. Because he knows with Henry dead, every alliance is either about to be rewarded or punished. And there's something else. Something ancient and unsettling. The body. Protocol dictates that a royal corpse be embalmed immediately, but this is Henry. And there's nothing simple about Henry. You glance at the physicians waiting for them to act, but they hesitate. The ulcer, the infection, the sheer bulk of him. It's not just unpleasant, it's dangerous. You remember a detail from an old text. Once a French king died and swelled so grotesquely they had to bury him in quicklime. You're beginning to understand why, and then you see it. A slow, wet stain blooming from the bedclothes. The leg wound. It's opened again, except now with no blood pressure to contain it. It's seeping freely black, thick, and smelling unmistakably like rot. The dog barks once, then disappears entirely. You aren't squeamish. But this is anatomical rebellion, as if his body refuses to go quietly. One of the apothecaries steps forward, cloth in hand. But the look on his face says it, all this is not fixable. This is decomposition in real time. Still, the royal image must be preserved. They begin to wrap the king. Carefully at first, with linen soaked in herbs and oil. But soon, out of necessity, more hurried. The stench is making people lightheaded. One of the younger servants faints against the tapestries. It's only been an hour. There's talk of moving the body, of keeping it away from the younger prince. Edward, only 9 years old, has not yet been told. They want to ease him into the reality. A funny idea, really, as if there's any easing into what comes next. You step outside the death chamber. The hallway feels cooler, quieter. A few guards stand at attention, their faces unreadable. But behind their eyes, terror. Because Henry wasn't just king. He was the sun around which their orbits spun. And now that sun has gone out. The chamberlain crosses himself in passing. You hear him whisper, "God have mercy on us all." Not for the dead, but for the living. There's an ancient superstition among palace staff, probably nonsense, but strangely persistent, that when a monarch as powerful as Henry dies, the walls of the palace absorb part of their spirit. And every time you touch the stone, you risk taking in a sliver of their soul. You reach out, pressing your hand against the cold wall anyway. Nothing happens. But you still pull it away quickly. Downstairs, the great hall is being prepped. Couriers sent, messages sealed, code words exchanged. There's even a pre-written script being dusted off the official death announcement. They just need to fill in the date and hour. Henry's own words are quoted in it. He once said, "We are never so near God as when we are on the brink of eternity." Poetic for a man who rarely acted with humility. And then there's the mask. One of the sculptors already summoned will begin work tonight on the death mask. Tradition dictates that it must be perfect, regal, unafraid. Except the face they'll mold is already disfigured. You wonder how they'll manage it. Will they smooth the swelling, reconstruct the nose? Add a touch of majesty to the sagging jowls. Historians still argue whether the famous death mask we know today actually resembles him at all, or whether it was stylized into something more noble. Because if truth were sculpted faithfully, it wouldn't look like a king. It would look like a warning. Back in the corridor, someone is weeping. Not loud, not dramatic. Just soft, restrained sobs. You turn to see one of the kitchen staff, an older woman dabbing her eyes with her apron. "Worked for him 30 years, she mutters. "Even monsters can be kind when they want." You nod, but say nothing. Because that's the maddening thing about tyrants. They weren't cruel every day. They made sure to hand out the occasional kindness to keep you confused. And maybe that's what she remembers. Or maybe she just knows that a world is ending. Because it is. Whether you mourn it or not, you descend the winding stairwell, each footstep a little more hesitant than the last. Outside, dawn still hesitates, but inside is pure unrest. The kind of tension that makes the hair on your arms stand up without permission. The lower halls feel like backstage at a crumbling theater. Couriers shuffle between doorways. Guards exchange tight-lipped glances. Servants move with forced calm, as if the ghost of Henry might snap at them from beyond if a teacup clinks too loudly. And still no one has told the people. The outside world is for now blissfully unaware that their monarch is dead. That the center of England's universe is gone, leaving a bloated, ulcer-ridden vacuum behind. You drift toward the Privy Council chambers where something peculiar is happening. They're burning papers. Not all of them, just the personal ones. Notes, drafts, marginal scribbles, all the little scraps of power Henry kept that no one was supposed to see. His own handwriting, corrections on ambassadorial reports, edits to executions lists, even love letters. You glimpse one briefly as it's thrown to the flames, a line scrawled in bold black, "My entirely beloved wife and none other," until the rest burns away before you can read it. The men around the hearth do not look guilty. They look focused, like surgeons carving out a tumor they don't want spreading. History. One whispers, should remember what we allow it to. And that's not new. Historians still argue whether Henry truly was the mastermind of his own myth or whether others shaped the narrative for him. But right now, you're watching myth control its own cleanup. Behind a curtain, someone is fitting Prince Edward with new robes. Crimson velvet, heavy embroidery, everything a boy of 9 should never have to wear. And he doesn't look excited, he looks petrified. Because while technically, yes, he's now King Edward VI, what he's really inherited is a pile of debt's enemies and an England dangerously used to obeying a single voice. And that voice has just stopped. You catch a glimpse of Edward's face as they adjust his collar. There's a flush of panic there, an understanding too heavy for his frame. He doesn't want this, not like this. But no one is asking. Just like no one asked Catherine Howard if she wanted to be a teenage bride, or Anne Boleyn if she preferred dignity over execution, or Mary, the eldest daughter, whether she minded being made illegitimate twice. Henry's entire reign was built on not asking, only commanding. And now the commands have stopped. But the fear's still very much alive. You step into the chapel needing a moment. The stained glass bleeds colored light onto the stone floor. It's quiet here, but not peaceful. There's a rumor whispered between pews that Henry's final confession was incomplete, that he refused to say certain things aloud, that he died unshriven. Couldn't risk sounding weak, someone says. You sit on a cold bench and listen. The preacher talks of divine mercy and earthly duty, but his hands tremble slightly as he flips the pages. Because everyone knows this is a careful balancing act. Speak too plainly, and you disrespect a king. Lie too boldly, and you offend heaven. So the eulogy becomes a strange, stuttering thing. They say he was strong-willed. He screamed at servants until he lost his voice. They say he loved his people. He taxed them into starvation. They say he was devoted to God. He created his own church just to swap wives. But you nod along anyway. Because that's what you do when tyrants die. Outside, a coach is being prepared for transport, not for the boy king, but for the body. A strange-looking box reinforced with iron and cedar sits atop the cart. It's barely shaped like a coffin, more like a crate for livestock. Because here's the truth they won't tell you in the pamphlets: Henry's body is decaying too quickly for ceremony. His ulcerated leg, once a battlefield wound, now a festering emblem of his decline, is oozing through the wrappings. The stench can't be masked, not even with vinegar or lavender oil. So the coffin must be sealed, fastened, and reinforced. It's no longer about presentation. It's about containment. They'll wait a few more days to announce the death. Give themselves time to arrange the facade. Meanwhile, the corpse of England's mightiest king will rot in silence. There's a poetic bitterness in that. You overhear a servant joke far too loudly that the journey to Windsor will be so putrid they'll have to follow the scent instead of the procession. He's promptly pulled aside and slapped hard behind a curtain. But even the guards are smirking. There's always a brief window after a tyrant dies, when gallows humor becomes socially acceptable. You wander the hallways again, letting the palace show its cracks. Tapestries hang crooked. Mice dart along the baseboards. The flowers in the antechamber are wilting, same as they've been for a week. No one replaced them. Maybe because they were waiting for him to finally die. And now that he has, what exactly is everyone supposed to feel? Relief, a grief, panic? All of the above. You lean against a column and listen to the silence swell. In this stillness, you finally hear what's been buried beneath all the fear and ceremony. A kind of collective exhale. Because no matter what happens next, whether England thrives or tears itself apart, one thing is certain. Henry Tudor, the rotting tyrant king, is gone. And somewhere deep in the bowels of the palace, you swear you hear something shift. Not physically, but historically. As if the country itself is bracing. The corridors stretch ahead like arteries. But now they pulse with a different kind of life, cautious, uncertain, the aftermath of a heart that has finally stopped beating. You walk them slowly, hearing only the soft shuffle of slippers on stone and the occasional clink of armor when a guard turns too quickly. Word of the king's death has not yet officially broken beyond the palace, but like a cracked goblet slowly leaking wine, it's spreading. Quietly, person to person, one anxious nod at a time. You step into a side chamber where the Duke of Somerset, Edward Seymour, brother of Jane Seymour, is already beginning to unfurl his plans like a spider spinning its web. He's calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that's almost rehearsed. He will be Lord Protector. Or at least that's what he's maneuvering toward. Not king, of course. Edward VI holds the crown, but Somerset intends to rule through the boy, cloaked in unclehood speaking for him, until he comes of age. Historians still argue whether Somerset was genuinely trying to safeguard England during a volatile transition, or whether he saw in his nephew's inexperience the perfect shadow puppet opportunity. You watch him now. Lips pursed, eyes calculating, and honestly, it's not looking great for the noble protector theory. You slip past the war room and into the private quarters. And there, behind a barely cracked door, you hear Mary. Mary Tudor, the eldest daughter. The one Henry named illegitimate, then legitimate again, then ignored, like an awkward family secret at a wedding. She sits beside a hearth, fingers white-knuckled around a rosary. She doesn't cry, but she's whispering Latin, over and over, like a shield, because she knows. Her life just became even more fragile. You might remember that Henry in his later years tried to patch things up with Mary, not out of love, but out of optics. A united royal front, a picture of fatherly forgiveness. But underneath it all, she was always a political inconvenience, Catholic, female, and smart enough to see through the charade. Now she's vulnerable. The Seymour faction favors Protestant reforms, and Mary is deeply publicly Catholic. That makes her both a symbol and a threat. She shifts in her seat, staring into the fire, and mutters, "It begins." You don't ask what. You already know. Across the castle, her younger sister Elizabeth, just 13, is being kept under careful watch. Not because she's dangerous per se, but because she's unpredictable. She's clever, unreadable, and so good at hiding what she really feels that half the court doesn't know whether to fear her or bet on her. She doesn't weep either. She sits upright, composed, as a governess brushes her hair. Not a strand out of place. The perfect image of obedience. And yet, there's steel beneath it. Elizabeth has already learned how the game is played. She knows her mother was executed not for witchcraft or adultery, but because Henry needed her out of the way. She knows that power in this court is a sharp, hungry thing. And right now it's looking for a new place to feed. Outside the palace, in the markets and taverns, people are starting to wonder. Why has it been so quiet? Why aren't the church bells ringing? Why does the city feel like it's holding its breath? You step outside for air and find yourself among the commoners. Vendors hawk wilted vegetables. Children chase stray dogs. Somewhere, someone plays a cracked lute badly enough to make a pigeon reconsider its perch. And still no one knows yet. You overhear a baker joke. He's probably off hunting lazy git, and everyone chuckles. But there's tension underneath. They sense something. They just can't name it yet. Because in Tudor England, news travels two ways swiftly if it's gossip, and slowly if it's dangerous. Back inside, the coffin has been sealed fully now. Iron nails hammered through thick cedar. Someone has draped it in Tudor banners, but it's not helping with the smell. A young steward quietly drops a bundle of herbs near the basement rosemary, and something pungent you can't quite place. The stink of royal decomposition is not something any of them prepared for. Certainly not Henry. He always imagined he'd go out in grandeur, some Shakespearean blaze of glory. Instead, he's leaking through his shroud before they've even buried him. You return to the council chamber where voices rise in whispered, frantic tones. What about France? What about the debts? What about the German mercenaries still waiting for payment? The truth is, Henry left more than just a bloated corpse behind. He left a nation wrapped in contradictions, Catholic ritual, but Protestant law, empty coffers, but lavish castles, a boy king, but a council full of vipers. And no clear plan for what comes next. Someone mentions a rumored prophecy that England would fall after the death of a lion king who roared too loudly. Someone else scoffs. But still, they cross themselves. Superstition has more sway when the throne is cold. You slip into the kitchens where the mood is less solemn and more relieved. The cooks are laughing not cruelly, but like people who finally dropped a crushing weight. One of them, a broad-shouldered woman with soot on her cheeks, mutters, "Now maybe we'll get less meat and more mercy." She's not wrong. Henry's diet was a glutton's opera. Roasted swan-gilded pastries ale by the barrel. His court followed suit, mimicking the extravagance, even when rations ran dry elsewhere. While peasants boiled weeds, nobles at court feasted on nightingale tongues. The cook wipes her hands and shrugs. We've been feeding a ghost for years. You can't help but agree. In many ways, Henry had died long before his body caught up. And now, the real ghosting begins. Rumors, revisions, carefully rewritten accounts. You can already feel the machinery of history grinding into gear. Everyone will have their version of the man. Was he a visionary? A tyrant? A tragic, misunderstood monarch? It's all of the above. You step back into the main hall as a group of nobles begins drafting the official statement of the king's death. Every word is being vetted, polished, weighed for political fallout. Do not say he suffered. Do not say he cried. Say he passed in peaceful dignity. Because that apparently is easier to stomach than the truth. That England's mightiest king died bloated, infected, raving, and afraid. You don't sleep that night. Not really. Not with all the muffled footfalls outside your chamber door. Not with the whispered conversation slithering through tapestries. Not with the chill that seems to wrap itself around your bones, no matter how many hearths burn. The next morning arrives gray, like even the sun is unsure whether to rise. A soft fog clings to the palace grounds, and for a moment, it feels like the whole world has taken a breath and held it. Now the truth must begin to trickle out. A small group of couriers, each handpicked for silence and loyalty, is dispatched to carry letters to every corner of the kingdom. These are not grand declarations, not yet. These are soft touches, gentle ripples before the wave hits. The letters are sealed with crimson wax and the royal stamp. Inside a carefully crafted line that begins the public transition. The king, it reads, has departed this life. Long live the king. Historians still debate who exactly approved the final wording, whether it was the Privy Council collectively, or whether Seymour pulled the strings alone. Either way, the phrasing is coldly brilliant. Not a death, not a tragedy, just a departure. Like a monarch stepping off stage. Cue the next act. Meanwhile, Edward VI is being dressed. You see him in his rooms, surrounded by a flurry of attendants. The boy is pale. His eyes blink fast, too fast, like someone struggling to stay ahead of tears. He's not ready. How could he be? He's 9 years old. He's more familiar with chess than with running a kingdom. His tutors hover nearby, whispering in Latin and clipped English. Hold still. Lift your chin. Smile, but not too wide. It's a coronation rehearsal wrapped in mourning garb. Edward fidgets, his fingers twitching. You can almost hear his thoughts. Where's my father? Why do I feel like prey? He's been told, of course, gently, delicately, that the king has died, that he is now the king. But the weight of those two truths hasn't settled yet. His small frame can't bear it, and you watching quietly realize this is one of history's strangest paradoxes. The moment you gain everything, you lose everything. The boy doesn't know it yet, but his reign will be short. His health, already frail, will deteriorate rapidly. He will try to push Protestant reform further, and he'll succeed in some ways, but his body won't survive the strain. In 6 years, he'll be dead. But that's the future. For now, he stands stiffly in a velvet doublet crowned in shadow, his lips trembling with something between fear and awe. Back outside, the bells finally begin to toll. The sound is deep, deliberate, slow as a heartbeat. 1, 2, 3. 38 in total, 1 for each year of Henry's reign. The city listens. Shutters open. Dogs bark. A baby cries. And across the rooftops of London, you feel the kingdom shift. In the tavern, someone murmurs, he's gone. And someone else spits on the floor. A few weep, a few pray. Most just shrug. Because kings die. What matters more is what comes after. Somewhere along the Thames, a boatman mutters, maybe now we can breathe again. Then he pulls the oar, and the river keeps flowing. You follow the bells back toward Westminster. The official proclamation is being nailed to posts, read aloud in markets, handed to clergy. The king is dead, they say, long live King Edward. It's such a strange phrase, isn't it? 2 kings. 1 breath. It's meant to imply continuity, but it feels more like denial. As if the kingdom refuses to allow even a second without a ruler. As if the land itself would panic without a crown to anchor it. And speaking of anchors, Catherine Parr, Henry's 6th and final wife, is packing. Yes, she survived him. Barely. You find her in her quarters directing servants with brisk efficiency. Her voice is calm, but her hands shake. She's not crying either. No one seems to cry for Henry. Have you noticed she's planning her exit discreetly? She has lands to retire to, books to finish, and one particularly scandalous love affair to revisit. You might find it surprising, but she'll soon marry Thomas Seymour, the brother of Edward Seymour, who's already begun sniffing around court like a dog near a roasting spit. Scandalous, yes, but also strangely predictable. Catherine knows that widowhood is no shield in this court. If anything, it's an invitation. And so she's getting out while she can. You pass her in the hall as she speaks to a maid pressing a wrapped bundle into her hands. Keep this close, she says, and don't tell anyone you have it. What's in it? Historians argue a book of forbidden prayers, a personal letter from Henry, a secret code for Protestant sympathizers. No one knows. But it vanishes from history that day and never resurfaces. Meanwhile, Henry's body lies in a sealed chamber, still swelling, still leaking. They've surrounded the coffin with more herbs now, lavender cloves, camphor, but it doesn't help. The smell is everywhere. Even the hounds avoid the room. A young boy, maybe a scullery assistant, tiptoes too close and promptly vomits. The guards don't even blink. They're used to it. The truth is, they waited too long to embalm him. Or rather, they tried to delay it for ceremonial reasons, and now it's too late. The body is decaying faster than tradition allows. But no one wants to rush the pageantry. And so they pretend. They pretend the king is at peace. They pretend the kingdom is stable. They pretend this 9-year-old child knows how to rule. And in that pretending, the Tudor myth grows stronger. Because now it's no longer Henry the man lying there, rotten, ruptured mortal. It's Henry the legend, the symbol, the Lion of England. And legends, unlike bodies, don't decay. You wake up the next day to a palace humming with tense anticipation. The air is thick, almost syrupy, with whispered plans and nervous laughter. Courtiers dart through corridors like shadows, avoiding the dawn, clutching scrolls and making calls on little-known couriers. The kingdom is still holding its breath, but the machinery of monarchy is already grinding forward. Your footsteps echo softly on the stone floors as you wander through the great hall, now stripped of much of its usual pomp. The once vibrant tapestries seem muted, dulled by the weight of recent events. Somewhere in the distance, a harpist plays a mournful tune, and the notes weave through the cold drafts, sneaking under doorways. It's almost hypnotic the way sorrow can sound like music. Meanwhile, Edward's regents are assembling, forming a fragile coalition of power. Edward Seymour, the king's brother-in-law, is positioning himself carefully, his eyes sharp and calculating, under that mop of unruly hair. Rumor has it he's angling to become Lord Protector, basically the kingdom's CEO, while the boy king figures out which way is up. Historians still argue whether Seymour's ambition was born of genuine loyalty or ruthless opportunism. Maybe it's both. Welcome to Tudor politics. Elsewhere, Catherine Parr is quietly closing chapters on her past. She's left the palace, but remains a ghost in the corridors, her influence lingering like a faint perfume. And speaking of ghosts, the palace's servants are sharing stories about the king's final days, some painting him as a tyrant in agony, others whispering about his sudden tenderness toward his children. You overhear a pair of footmen debating whether the king's infamous temper softened in his last hours, or if the disease merely dulled it. One says, "I saw him smile once like a child," while the other grumbles smiles don't count when you're rotting from the inside. And then there's the strange rumor that keeps surfacing in hushed corners, that Henry VIII's death wasn't just from his failing health, but maybe something more sinister. Poison, a curse, some sort of dark Tudor conspiracy. Historians have tossed these ideas around like a hot potato, but no one's ever found the receipt. You pull your cloak tighter as you step outside into the chill morning air. The streets of London are alive again, and the citizens, always the unpredictable element, are already reacting in their own way. Some are lighting candles for the late king, while others are quietly raising mugs in taverns to the new boy on the throne. You pause to watch a group of children playing near a fountain. They have no idea their playtime is shadowed by a kingdom's uncertainty. For them, life will go on. And for the rest of us, well, history will write itself in messy, tangled lines. You find yourself wandering through the tangled streets of Tudor London, the scent of wood smoke and stale ale, mixing with the faint aroma of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. The city is buzzing, but beneath the surface, an uneasy calm hangs in the air. News travels fast in these narrow alleys, whispers about the boy king's arrival, about what his reign might bring, and about the shadow his father's legacy casts. You pause outside a bustling tavern, where a group of merchants and sailors debate Henry's life and death over mugs of frothy ale. One gruff man insists the king was a monster, a tyrant who crushed anyone who dared oppose him, while another counters that Henry was a man shaped by his brutal times, forced to make impossible decisions. You catch the words historians still argue whether Henry's ruthlessness was necessary for England's survival, or simply a path to cruelty. You move on your footsteps, echoing past storefronts, where artisans and craftsmen busy themselves with their daily trades. The tapestry of Tudor life unfolds around you, a tailor measuring fabric for a noble's gown, a blacksmith hammering red-hot iron, a street performer juggling to the delight of an eager crowd. Despite the grand political drama playing out above life, here continues in its stubborn, messy way. Later, you climb the steps to the Tower of London, where Henry's body lies in state. The halls are quiet, except for the soft murmurs of mourners and the distant tolling of bells. The once mighty king, now reduced to a still figure draped in regal cloth, symbolizes the end of an era. The contrast is stark. The fierce man who wielded power with iron will now silent his mortal frame, betrayed by disease and time. Strangely, there are rumors of strange happenings near the king's tomb, flickering lights, whispered voices, and even sightings of a shadowy figure wandering the grounds at night. Scholars debate whether these are just the product of grieving minds or something more eerie. Historians still argue whether Tudor ghosts are real or just folklore spun to keep the past alive. You overhear a guard muttering as you step out into the fading light. You realize the story of Henry VIII is far from over. His legacy, with all its contradictions and controversies, will ripple through time, shaping the fate of England in ways no one can fully predict. You drift through the evening haze, the sky above London, turning a bruised purple as the sun dips below the horizon. The city's noises soften to a murmur, and lanterns flicker to life, casting warm pools of light that dance against cobblestones. The mood is bittersweet hope mingled with uncertainty, like the last breath of a fading song. Inside the royal chambers, preparations for Henry's funeral are underway. You imagine the somber faces of courtiers arranging silk drapes and polishing armor for the procession. The spectacle is designed to project strength, yet beneath the pomp lies a kingdom grappling with the void left by its larger-than-life ruler. The atmosphere is thick with superstition. Some servants cross themselves furtively, whispering about omens, black cats slipping through hallways, strange winds rattling shutters. One old nurse claims she saw the king's ghost sitting by his bedside, gazing out toward the Thames. You can't help but wonder if grief and fear are conjuring phantoms where none exist. In the streets, rumors swirl like autumn leaves caught in the wind. Some say Henry's death was a divine punishment for his sins. Others whisper about secret poisons conspiracies brewed in shadowed corners. You hear a young scholar debating loudly at a tavern. Historians still argue whether Henry's physical decline was natural or accelerated by enemies' plots. You stroll past St. Paul's Cathedral, its silhouette looming against the darkening sky. Inside, prayers echo softly, and flickering candles illuminate faces lifted in solemn reverence. The city collectively holds its breath, caught between mourning a tyrant and welcoming a boy king whose future is as uncertain as the flickering flames. Later, as night deepens, you find a quiet spot overlooking the River Thames. The water's surface glints with moonlight, reflecting the tumultuous times. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of history pressing gently on your shoulders. The chill of early morning creeps into your bones as you wander near the palace grounds. A mist clings to the gardens, softening the edges of statues and hedges, casting everything in a ghostly silver light. The kingdom is still reeling the air, thick with a mixture of fear, hope, and uncertainty. Henry VIII's death feels less like an end and more like the opening note of a new, unpredictable symphony. You find yourself drawn to the Chapel Royal, where the boy king's coronation is being planned in hushed urgency. The atmosphere is solemn but electric as nobles and clergy hustle to prepare for a ceremony that will legitimize Edward VI's rule. There's a palpable tension. Everyone knows this moment could either stabilize the kingdom or tip it into chaos. In the nearby courtyards, young Edward practices walking with regal stiffness, surrounded by tutors and guards. You watch as his expression flickers between determination and the wide-eyed uncertainty of a child suddenly thrust into enormous responsibility. It's a poignant reminder that behind the crown lies a fragile human being. You overhear a conversation between two advisors debating the king's upbringing. Historians still argue whether Edward's strict Protestant education was a blessing or a curse for England's future. One says voice low but firm. The other nods grimly, mentioning the religious upheaval that lies ahead. As you stroll through the palace corridors, the echoes of Henry's reign linger like ghosts. Portraits of the late king stare down with stern eyes, while tapestries tell tales of conquest and controversy. The past and future intertwine here, and you realize that England stands at a crossroads, its destiny balanced on a knife's edge. The day wears on, and you find yourself reflecting on the fragility of power and the human stories beneath the grand history books. The rot may have claimed Henry VIII, but the story of his kingdom, its triumphs, failures, and dreams, marches relentlessly onward. The soft light of afternoon spills through the stained glass windows of Westminster Abbey, casting kaleidoscopic colors onto the stone floor. You step inside, feeling the cool hush of centuries of worship and ceremony. Today, the Abbey holds the weight of a kingdom still mourning, still questioning. The funeral procession for Henry VIII is set to begin soon. You imagine the grand spectacle, the royal banners fluttering the heavy ornate coffin draped in velvet and gold, and the somber march of nobles, clergy, and soldiers. This is a performance designed to cement Henry's legacy, but also to remind the people of the power still held by the crown. You catch the whispered conversations of those gathered. Some praise Henry's strength and reforms, while others quietly criticize his tyranny and ruthlessness. It's clear that even in death, Henry remains a polarizing figure. Historians still argue whether Henry VIII should be remembered as a visionary reformer or a despotic tyrant. You overhear an elderly monk muse. Among the mourners, you spot Lady Mary Henry's daughter cloaked in black. Her expression is a mixture of grief and defiance, hinting at the complex family drama that shaped this royal household. You wonder how she feels about her father's controversial legacy and the uncertain future that awaits her. Outside, the streets are lined with commoners, their faces a mix of curiosity, sorrow, and perhaps relief. The death of a king, especially one like Henry, is never simple. It signals change, sometimes painful, always profound. As the procession moves slowly towards the resting place, you feel the weight of history settling over you. The rot may have consumed the man, but his story is woven into the very fabric of England, shaping the nation long after the last candle is extinguished. Night descends over London, wrapping the city in a velvet cloak, punctuated by flickering candlelight and distant church bells. The funeral rites have ended, but the echoes linger, soft prayers, whispered regrets, and the weight of a legacy that feels as heavy as the stone tomb now sealed. You wander through the silent streets where shadows stretch long and the air carries a faint chill. The city seems to hold its breath, caught between mourning and anticipation. Whispers of what's to come ripple through taverns and alleyways alike. In a quiet corner of the palace, courtiers discuss the delicate balance of power now resting on young Edward's shoulders. The boy king is vulnerable, a fact that both comforts and terrifies those who wield influence. Historians still argue whether Edward's reign was doomed from the start or simply a tragic victim of circumstance. You overhear a noblewoman say, with a wistful sigh. You imagine Edward's tutors working late into the night, preparing him for a future that demands more than his years can bear. There's a somber poetry in the contrast, a kingdom forged by Henry's iron will, now entrusted to a fragile boy whose health is already cause for concern. You pause by the Thames, the water dark and calm beneath the moonlight. Reflections ripple gently, mirroring the uncertainties of the realm. Henry's death closes a violent chapter, but the story of England's transformation is far from over. As the night deepens, you feel the steady pulse of history beneath your feet. In the relentless march of time, the shifting tides of power, and the fragile hope that even in darkness, something new might emerge. The first light of dawn seeps softly into your room, brushing away the shadows of night like a gentle hand. As you wake, the weight of the past night's journey lingers, a slow unraveling of a king's final days and the fragile threads holding a nation together. You picture the young Edward, now crowned, but still a child, stepping into a role shaped by the towering legacy of his father. The challenges ahead are immense religious upheaval, political intrigue, and the ever-present question of survival in a ruthless court. Historians still debate whether Edward's early death was fate or a consequence of the immense pressure placed upon him. What is clear, however, is that the rot which consumed Henry VIII, both physical and moral, cast long shadows over England's future. You close your eyes and let the stories settle like dust on a well-worn book, the echoes of the past fading into a quiet calm. The roaring flames of a tyrant's final hours give way to the gentle flicker of hope, a kingdom poised between ruin and renewal. Now, as you prepare to drift into sleep, remember, history is never just about kings and battles. It's about people, their hopes, fears, and the stories they leave behind. And with that comforting thought, you can let go, safe, soothed, and ready for the dreams that await. You wake to the clatter of hurried footsteps echoing through the corridors of Hampton Court Palace. The news of Henry's death has barely settled, and already the machinery of power is grinding into motion. Courtiers whisper alliances, plotting their next moves in a game that now revolves around a boy king barely more than a child. The tension is palpable. No one knows how long Edward will reign or who might seize power if he falters. You imagine the cold calculation behind the smiles and bows, the masked ambitions cloaked in courtly etiquette. Historians still debate the true extent of the factionalism that plagued Edward's regency, you think to yourself. In the shadows, you see key figures like Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, maneuvering for control as Lord Protector. His grip is firm but contested, and his policies set the stage for religious reform and social unrest. You wonder how much of this chaos could have been avoided if Henry had lived longer, or if his death was perhaps inevitable. Outside the palace, the city stirs with uncertain energy. Rumors of rebellion mingle with the hope for peace, and you feel the pulse of a nation on the brink of transformation. The rot that gnawed at Henry's body seems to echo in the fractured soul of England itself. You breathe deeply the cool morning air, filling your lungs, and realize that the story is far from over. The final hours of a tyrant may be behind you, but the echoes of his reign will reverberate for decades to come. The streets of London are alive with uneasy whispers as you navigate through the bustling crowds. People debate the future, torn between mourning a king and fearing what his death might bring. You catch fragments of conversations, some hopeful, others laced with dread. The old order feels fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind. In the royal court, Edward's youth becomes both a symbol of innocence and a vulnerability ripe for exploitation. You picture his advisors debating reforms and consolidating power while the boy struggles to grasp his sudden role. Historians still argue whether Edward's reign was a genuine chance for change, or merely a continuation of Tudor turmoil you reflect. The religious upheaval ignited under Henry's later years now threatens to engulf the kingdom. Protestant ideas spread quietly but steadily, while conservative factions resist fiercely. You imagine the tension in sermons, the hushed fears of families divided by faith. Meanwhile, Edward's health is precarious, a shadow looming over every decision. His fragile body contrasts sharply with the heavy crown he must bear, and you wonder how much time he truly has. You pause near the Tower of London, where the ghosts of the past seem to linger in the cold stone. The legacy of executions, betrayals, and political intrigue feels palpable. Henry's death marks an end, but also a beginning, filled with uncertainty and potential peril. As the sun sets, you feel the weight of history pressing in a reminder that even the mightiest rulers are mortal and their empires fragile. You find yourself in the quiet chambers where Edward's tutors prepare him for the day ahead. The boy king's education is rushed and relentless, a crash course in kingship that no child should endure. You see the strain in his eyes, the weight of expectation pressing down like the crown itself. His tutors push Protestant doctrine, hoping to solidify religious reform, but resistance simmers beneath the surface. You hear the faint murmur of dissent from older nobles clinging to Catholic traditions, their loyalty divided and dangerous. Historians still debate the influence of Edward's advisors. Were they guiding a young king or manipulating a pawn? The lines blur as you imagine the court's tangled web of power ambition and fragile trust. Outside the palace, England breathes with unrest. Peasant revolts sparked by harsh economic conditions and religious changes threaten to spill into open conflict. You picture yourself walking through villages, hearing whispered fears and quiet prayers for stability. Despite the turmoil, there are moments of tenderness, Edward's brief smiles, his curiosity about the world beyond the throne. It's a stark contrast to the grim reality surrounding him. You wonder how much of this young boy's fate is shaped by forces beyond his control, and how much by the turbulent times into which he was born. The cold stone halls seem colder still as you walk through the corridors of power where Edward's health begins to falter. The boy king's frailty is no secret. Whispers of consumption and fever echo through the court. You feel the tension twist tighter with every cough that shakes his small frame. The nobles watch with bated breath, some hopeful for the continuation of reform. Others anxious about the power vacuum his death will leave. You catch glimpses of scheming faces plotting for influence in a realm on the edge of chaos. Historians still debate whether Edward's untimely death was hastened by illness alone, or if political intrigue played a part. The truth remains cloaked like so many Tudor secrets. Outside, the streets pulse with rumors and uncertainty. You imagine citizens clutching rosaries or pamphlets depending on which faith offers them hope in such fragile times. The kingdom balances precariously between revolution and restoration. You pause by the River Thames, watching its steady flow, a reminder that lifelike history moves forward despite human frailty. Henry VIII's rot may have ended, but its echoes ripple through his successors and the very fabric of England. As night falls, the world waits, holding its breath for the final chapters yet to be written. You're drawn to the somber atmosphere of Edward's funeral preparations. The boy king, barely a teenager, is to be laid to rest with all the pomp befitting a monarch. But the grief beneath the ceremony is raw and palpable. Courtiers exchange guarded glances, knowing this death shifts the entire balance of power. The procession winds through London's streets, lined with mourners who wear both sorrow and anxiety on their faces. You feel the heavy air of uncertainty as if the city itself holds its breath. Historians still argue how Edward's brief reign shaped the future of the Tudor dynasty you muse. Behind the scenes, political factions scramble to secure their positions, eyeing the next heir with ambition and suspicion. The legacy of Henry VIII's ruthless consolidation of power has left England a powder keg ready to ignite. You imagine yourself walking alongside the mourners, the muted drumbeats echoing in your chest, the scent of incense mingling with the chill of an English autumn. It's a stark reminder that even the mightiest kings can fall, leaving their kingdoms vulnerable and uncertain. The rotting tyrant king is dead, but the story of his reign is far from over. It lingers in the shadows, shaping the destinies of those left behind. You linger in the royal chambers, now silent after the funeral, the heavy velvet curtains drawn, muffling the outside world. The palace feels like a tomb, the echoes of a once thundering reign reduced to whispers and dust. The weight of Henry VIII's shadow still presses down, even in death. His children, like pieces on a chessboard, are maneuvered by unseen hands, each with their own destiny, not entirely their own. You reflect on the ways Henry's brutal choices fractured his family and kingdom, setting the stage for decades of upheaval. Historians still debate how much blame to assign to Henry's relentless ambition versus the turbulent times he lived in. Was he a visionary or a tyrant, doomed to rot from within? In the quiet, you hear distant laughter from the palace gardens, reminders that life, even in darkness, finds ways to continue. Yet the rot beneath the surface remains an invisible poison, threatening to unravel the fragile peace. You sense that history is not done with this family, nor with England's tortured path toward stability. You step into the cold, morning light, filtering through the stained glass windows of Westminster Abbey, where the echoes of past coronations and funerals mingle like ghosts. The tombs of England's kings hold stories of power and decay, ambition and downfall. Henry VIII's resting place is grand but tinged with irony, a man who reshaped England now entombed in stone. Outside, the city buzzes with anticipation and anxiety about the future. The religious upheavals Henry unleashed continue to fracture the nation, with Protestant and Catholic factions vying for influence. You imagine the quiet prayers and secret meetings held in candlelit rooms plotting England's soul. Historians still argue how much Henry's reforms truly transformed England versus how much chaos they sowed. Was he a reformer or a reckless destroyer? You breathe in the ancient air, feeling the weight of centuries pressing down, reminding you that history's rot often runs deeper than flesh and bone. The rotting tyrant king may be gone, but his legacy festers in the very heart of England's story. You wander through the royal archives, the scent of old parchment filling your nostrils as you trace the tangled lines of Henry VIII's decrees and letters. His handwriting, bold and commanding, reveals a man obsessed with control and legacy. Yet beneath the ink lies a fragile human grappling with illness, paranoia, and loneliness. The documents tell stories of political marriages, brutal executions, and sweeping religious reforms that shook the foundations of England. You find yourself both horrified and fascinated by the sheer scale of his ambition and the rot that accompanied it. Historians still debate the sincerity of Henry's religious convictions. Was he a true believer or a cunning politician using faith as a tool? The answer remains elusive, like a shadow flickering just beyond reach. You close the heavy tome, aware that the written word preserves both truth and myth, and that the real Henry VIII lies somewhere in between. You find yourself walking the overgrown grounds of the now crumbling Hampton Court Palace, once Henry's favorite residence. The grandeur is faded ivy, clutching at the stone like the creeping rot in the king's own body during his final days. The echoes of lavish feasts and royal intrigues seem almost tangible in the quiet air. The servants' quarters hint at the daily lives of those who served the tyrant king, some loyal, others resigned to survive. You imagine whispered gossip about Henry's violent temper and swollen frame, a man growing monstrous, yet still demanding devotion. Historians still argue about how much the king's deteriorating health affected his cruel decisions. Did the rotting flesh fuel his paranoia? The question lingers in the shadowed halls. You pause near the gardens, where once Henry strolled with a sword at his side, a king wrestling with his own mortality and legacy. The beauty is undeniable, but the rot remains beneath both stone and flesh. You enter the great hall where Henry once held court, imagining the sharp clang of armor and the murmur of courtiers bending under his will. The air feels thick with unspoken fears, an empire's heartbeat quickening as its ruler weakens. His rot, both physical and moral, has left scars far deeper than flesh. The infamous executions, the ruthless dissolutions of monasteries, the merciless silencing of dissent all echo through these walls like ghosts refusing to rest. You almost hear the whispers of Anne Boleyn and Thomas More, their fates entwined with the king's spiraling decline. Historians still debate whether Henry's tyranny was a necessary cruelty or a descent into madness. You sense the truth is tangled in the blood and stone around you. As you turn to leave, a chill runs down your spine, a reminder that even the mightiest rot from within and their legacies can haunt centuries. You find yourself amid the echoes of the king's final days, where even his closest companions could barely recognize the man Henry VIII had become. The once vibrant monarch, now swollen and crippled by disease, haunted by pain and paranoia, grasped at fading power. You can almost hear the rattling breaths, the labored steps, the desperate commands whispered through cracked lips. The court around him stiffened, unsure whether to comfort or fear the dying tyrant. Historians still argue whether his decline was swift or drawn-out torment that shaped England's future monarch's distrust of power. You feel the weight of that uncertainty hanging heavy in the air. In this dim, suffocating space, the rot isn't just physical. It's the erosion of trust, loyalty, and hope. Henry's death wasn't just an end, but the beginning of a new and precarious chapter. You stand at the crossroads of history, witnessing the uneasy transition from Henry's rule to the fragile reign of his son, Edward VI. The young king inherits a kingdom scarred by his father's ambitions and the deep rot left behind in both body and spirit. The palace corridors now buzz with whispers of reform and resistance, with factions jockeying for influence in a realm still healing from tyranny's wounds. You sense the heavy burden resting on Edward's shoulders, youth and innocence, caught in a maelstrom of political intrigue. Historians still debate how much Edward's brief reign could have changed England's course, if not cut short by illness. The what-ifs hang in the air like a thick fog. You take a deep breath, feeling that history's rot doesn't always consume. Sometimes it challenges new growth amid decay. You find yourself in the silent aftermath, where Henry VIII's rot, both literal and metaphorical, settles into the fabric of England's identity. His tumultuous reign, marked by brutality and grandeur, leaves a kingdom forever changed, its future uncertain yet brimming with potential. The ghosts of his decisions linger in ancient halls, echoing through centuries of history, and reminding you that power is as fragile as flesh. Yet amid the decay, there is resilience, a stubborn thread of life weaving through the ruins. Historians still argue whether Henry was a monstrous tyrant or a flawed visionary whose ambition reshaped the world. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. As the shadows lengthen, you feel a gentle calm washing over you, the story winding down like a slow breath in the night. Now, as we close the chapter on Henry VIII's final hours, let the vivid images of a rotting king and a fracturing kingdom soften into quiet reflection. The brutality, the grandeur, and the inevitable decay are part of a human story, one of ambition, pain, and the relentless passage of time. As you drift into sleep, remember that even in the darkest histories, there is a spark of life that endures beyond the rot. So rest easy, knowing history's lessons are not just warnings, but whispers of resilience. Sweet dreams.